Gallery Poet in Residence, Rick Koh Buck Song. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a conversation with the National Gallery Poet in Residence, Rick Koh Buck Song. I'm Eric Tinsay Valles, Director of Poetry Festival Singapore. And we have special audience members from different educational institutions, both here and abroad, right? From the US, from Clementi, the Philippines. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you the man of the hour, Mr. Rick Koh Buck Song. He is a very accomplished writer and artist. And in his work, he traces correspondences between verse and the visual arts in communicating his vision of contemporary Singapore. He has written over 40 books, including A Brief History of Topayo and Other Poems, and Around the World in 68 Days, Observations of Life from a Journey Across 13 Countries, published last year during the pandemic. And he's also published 13 haiga artworks of haiku with ink sketches. And he was poet in residence at the Scottish Poetry Library in Edinburgh in 1992 under the Singapore-Scotland Cultural Cooperation Program, and has also spoken at literary events, including in Manila, Cambridge University, Harvard, and MIT. And he's been an adjunct editor of Singapore Center for Livable Cities. He's authored and edited reports on the annual World City Summit since 2014. He was a columnist in political arts, journalist with Singapore's main English daily, The Straits Times, and he's got so many more accomplishments there. But maybe we should begin. So Rick, maybe you can read to us one of your works, inspired by an artwork in National Gallery, Singapore.
Right, I'll start with this poem. It's called Working from Home, and it's inspired by this painting, village scene by the Cambodian artist Nick Dim. What of the 32 poems and artworks that are in a book that will be published by the National Gallery Singapore, most of them have pandemic reference. Some are very explicit, some less so, but they're all situated in this time between 2021 and 2022. And what I wanted to do was to capture that whole sense of living through this time. And I think this is one of the offerings that poetry can have for the world. This is what something that poetry can give, this effort to record in important, significant moments. And in this poem, what I was trying to do is to highlight the pandemic parallels in this scene. But first, let me say a few words about the painting. What it shows is a seemingly idyllic village scene, which I think one would find all across Southeast Asia and also many other parts of the world. This was captured in 1960, and what is especially significant about this poem is that the United States government actually used this image and featured it in magazines and other publications. And in some of these publications were published in the home languages of the Southeast Asian countries in which they appeared. And the key idea that the US government wanted to convey is the importance of freedom across this region at that time. As you know, it was just before and leading up to what later became known as the Vietnam War and other conflicts in that region. But what I wanted to use this poem and use the words of the poem, words and ideas of the poem to connect from this moment, which is actually some 62 years ago, to the present, and to draw out the pandemic parallels. So this is the poem, Working from Home. When 2019's heinous plague revamped just about everything, it also took us all back in time to when working from home was always the way, like here, a different distancing from other folks who shun any hint of transport so far out from city comfort. This was always enough. Self-sufficiency from handiwork, creating clay pots to salvage water, conserve food, every village its own bubble. The new discomforts of segregation were normal, a rural tradition. What looks like languishing is a balm, in fact, of true serenity and calm. Isolation may be uncomfortably new, but truth is old. That such images of rice fields, village markets, show a story some thought had to hide bigger picture incursions, shifts. When this equilibrium with nature is sustainable only with self-care, assured of needs, mostly now laid bare.
Wonderful. I began for that. Thank you very much, Rick. And Umberto Eco says that we live in an age of lost innocence. And some of the trauma theorists say that our age is one of interminable trauma. And so that sentiment is expressed in your poem. And you saw that in that particular, it looks like a romantic painting in a way, this kind of Fauvist, post-impressionistic. And I just want to ask how you handle like the tension between excessive sentiment, like because of the experience that you're trying to convey in your poetry, and self-distancing, which we find there in that first stanza, of frigidity. Like, is there a tension at all when you write poetry about traumatic experiences like COVID-19?
I think what is very fascinating is the way that poetry interacts with the visual arts, and in this case, in painting in particular, the way that now we're looking at this image 62 years later, and we see things that people would not have seen 62 years ago, and the artist may not have intended that. That's the beauty of art, that its meaning can change, evolve, be expanded. And poetry has that a possibility of interacting with that image. With this image in particular, it is part of a series of works that I have. Some I've completed, some I'm still working on, and they all have to do with this very broad theme of the legacy of imperialism or colonialism, or the incursion, or just simply the simple visitation of forces from outside that region. There are a few different types of this kind of imperialism. Some is actual colonization. Many of the countries in Southeast Asia are former colonies of European powers. And there's also, of course, on the other end of the spectrum, there's also the soft imperialism, the imperialism through culture and soft power. So these are some of the themes that I'm quite fascinated by.
I was about to ask you that later on, but just you've already brought it up. How has the post-colonial history of Singapore affected your work as a poet? And I don't know if also the artists whose works you've reinterpreted in your verses, like, were they affected at all by their post-colonial history in their respective countries?
Yes, I mean, it is a very, very, very rich tapestry. There are, in some cases, we're talking about decades, maybe even more, of history, and many, many layers, different before the colonization, during, and even the colonial era itself has many different phases. And then, of course, everything since then. And then that too has many different eras. It's like every time there is a new administration that's voted into power, it's like you have to, in some places, press the reset button, or everything could change. Less so in a place like Singapore, but even in Singapore, although it's the same ruling party in power since independence, the ruling party itself goes through many reset phases, and we are currently just going into yet another of these transition phases into a new administration. So yes, it's many multi-layered. Yeah.
All right, and then maybe you also know, like, your influences in your poetry, and since you've brought up, like, the post-colonial history and all that, are you trying to problematize maybe some of the legacies that you've received from the former colonial masters in your poetry?
Well, I have more of the time been more interested in what has happened after independence rather than before, and also looking to the future. Maybe I'll share another poem, and then we can also talk a bit more about that. This is an artwork that was part of the Light Tonight festival in 2020 at the start of this year. This artwork was called Fragment of a Shoreline. There were many very impressive installations. This was the one that resonated most with me because of the themes that we've just been talking about, the layers of history, or before independence, after independence, and I'm always also trying to look to the future, even as we try to examine the present and re-examine the past. This installation is actually quite. It's really quite an amazing work. What the artist did was to construct this a box. It's a sandbox, if you like, on a padang. And it's positioned at the place, and with the outline, as you see, the curved outline of Singapore's southern coastline at that point in the year 1843. So they recreated this beach with the sand, and if you visited it, you could take off your shoes and have a walk in the sand. I did some doodling in the sand, and online there is a companion content which delves into something like a dozen stories, different stories from 1843 right up to the present, the different coastlines, because that coastline has changed many times, been reclaimed many times over. So this work inspired me to write this poem which I called Shoring Singapore. Shoring is in this case is taken from, is a technical term taken from building construction, because like when you're building a building, parts of it are not ready, so you need to shore up parts of it, otherwise the whole structure will collapse. So you have to shore up the parts that are not ready as you're progressively constructing the building. This poem is a sonnet. It has a first stanza of four pairs of rhyming couplets, and a second stanza of 3 rhyming couplets. So, shoring Singapore. Shoring, just temporary support in construction jargon, but becoming an enduring foundation buffering this interface. Each sea conquest, redrawing boundaries, layers. Fresh bequest, redistributing earth from other banks. Padang relayed after flags, fireworks, tanks. As mandates, visions, plans reconfigure, son of the soil becomes a metaphor. Who knows what other shorelines might await? Which realignments fit for even more open trade? How higher tide lines can again be redrafted for on revamped drawing boards as crafted bay and downtown herald a brighter future for this shifting city in nature.
Thank you very much.
So, as I was saying earlier, this poem is about history since independence, and with an eye to the future. That's that period of history that I'm more interested in than the pre-independence, which we dealt with in 2019, the bicentennial year. And I also try to work in some of the themes which are very high on the global agenda currently. For example, the issue of climate change in the line, how higher tide lines can again be redrafted for, and the realignments fit for even more open trade. I mean, Singapore's the importance that Singapore places on keeping the sea lanes open and having a multilateral trading system.
Yeah, so the second artwork is in sharp contrast with the first that you showed earlier. It's a minimalist contemporary installation artwork. And in response to that, you actually tried to reclaim the old form of the sonnet and made it your own. And I wonder how you were inspired by that artwork to come up with this contemporary sonnet?
The whole aspect of reclamation is something that has fascinated me from the earliest days of my writing poetry. One of my earliest poems was called Reclamation, and and especially in a place like Singapore, this island that has been remade and remade countless times, and no doubt will be remade many more times. I mean, just think of some of the major transformations that are currently underway: the Greater Southern Waterfront, all these cross island green networks, park connectors, and so on. So it really gets to the heart of the essence of what Singapore is as a place to live, and a place where human ingenuity, human endeavor has endlessly strived to overcome the challenges of nature, history, and etc.
Wonderful. So, and then for this particular metaphor, you've chosen contemporary jargon like shoring, and you put it there in the title. And then you have a strict rhyme scheme, except for the ending of the first stanza, or the first 8 lines, right? So reconfigure is paired with metaphor. Is that intentional on your part? Since there's a break there in the middle of this sonnet.
Well, to me, it sounds like a good enough metaphor. A good enough rhyme.
And reconfigure is that the one that breaks it.
Yeah, and actually that line, "Son of the soil" becomes a metaphor. Reminds me of, and it's also borrowed from an experience that I had in a conversation with quite a senior politician in Singapore, whom I won't name. One day
we can guess who
we
he
were
is.
talking about reclamation, and at that time, sand was being imported for Singapore's reclamation work from Indonesia. It comes from, actually, interestingly, comes from including Cambodia, the location of the previous poem. Anyway, back to the story. We were talking about reclamation, and at that time, sand imports came from Indonesia, and I just joked that, when we go to this reclaimed area, we will be standing in a way on Indonesian soil, and the politician that I was with bristled and vehemently disagreed. So it kind of it's my personal story that gives added meaning to this line. Son of the soil becomes a metaphor because the soil came from somewhere else. But of course, once it's here, it becomes wholly Singaporean, just like all the people from other places who have come here, including yourself, Eric, and my ancestors, came here and made this place home.
Yes, and you speak about reconfiguring in this sonnet, and I just want to ask you, how do you see the poetic scene and the literary scene in Singapore in the future? How do you think will it be reconfigured in the coming years? Yes.
I think when you look at the scene, I think it's always useful to look at the ecosystem in terms of its component groups. One group would be the content creators, the people who create art or poetry. People like you and me, Eric, who sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with an idea for fresh content and get excited about it. That's one group, the content creators. And then we have the audiences. And for visual art, and the same goes for poetry, all the artists and poets are asking for is, from the audiences, is the gift of their attention. Because most of the content can be accessed for free. I mean, like, for example, the National Gallery, if you live here, you can see the main collections for for free. And if you go to the National Library or even La Salle Library, you can borrow books of poetry and access it at any time. So all we're asking for is that gift. And then the third group would be the people who support these endeavors, from the state to all other patrons and donors, and including corporate corporate philanthropy. I think to your question of how I think it would be reconfigured, I think in recent years there's been a kind of fundamental change, right, in the way that people access any information. Most of it is through a mobile phone or some digital means. So the digital realm must surely have some impact. And I can only think that for poetry, since, and the same goes for much of art, that since it actually is conducive to that platform. For example, a poem, most poems can fit on one phone screen, especially if it's a short one like a haiku, or haiga accompanied with a visual art element. So I think these and of course the visual is crucial, right? And in social media or anything digital, you must have some visual elements. So I think the foundations are there, and so what is missing must be the cultivation of audiences and promotion. And to look at the difference between the visual arts and poetry, one could say, to look at some of the key differences, and I was just thinking that I can see two major differences. One is curation, and the other is patronage. Curation in the sense that for the visual arts, you always have annotation, right? Imagine if you went to a museum or a gallery and all that annotation was removed, you'll be quite lost, right? We rely on the annotation, a curator, someone guiding us to appreciate the artwork. The same is not true for poetry. Usually the poem is left there on its own.
And these days, publishers don't want poets to put footnotes or endnotes.
Yes, I've never heard. I've never understood that why people are so allergic to any sort of explanation. Why is the world so different? I mean, the world of visual arts is completely different, and nobody would say no. Remove all the annotation, right? But they almost demand that for poetry. So I think we should reconfigure that. Otherwise, if we don't, because you're missing that vital piece of promotion and you're competing with everything else in the digital realm, and that would spell disaster.
And then you mentioned the haiga tradition, and so Rick is a proponent of the haiga art form. And what is your approach to that artwork? And have you ever explored that on Instagram? So because these days, Insta poetry looks like that. It's like a haiga.
Well, haiga dates back to the 16th or 17th century in Japan. It essentially is a haiku with a visual art element, either an ink sketch or watercolor. I first came across it when I was invited by the Japan Foundation to visit Japan as a cultural leader in 2015. And what I've done is to try to modernize it, to write in English, to add to cheat and add a title to have more space for a little bit more content and explanation also. And I've also where it involves, for example, a haiga about a foreign place like Cambodia. I did a series for ASEAN's 50th anniversary where I tried to use one word from the Cambodian language. What fascinates me about haiga is the way that the visual arts and poetry come together and reinforce each other. I mean, all of us are so familiar with this phrase that a picture paints 1,000 words. Right? So with haiga, I am trying to flip that around and make the opposite just as important, which is that a word can evoke 1,000 pictures. So everyone accepts the first statement, picture paints 1,000 words, but very few think of its opposite. When it's, to me, it's just as true. And given its given its brevity, its conciseness, and the fact that it fits on a one phone screen and can be easily shared, I think there's scope for it to reach a lot larger audiences. But what is fascinating about haiga is how little known it is. Even in Japan, I think very few Japanese people would have even come across the term haiga. And my theory is that it has to do with the way that the art world has developed through these all these decades and centuries, and somehow haiga remain a niche form. The market never took to it and promoted, and the galleries and promoters, art critics, writers, curators, and so on, never took to promoting it in a big way. So it remains a niche interest, and maybe that explains why it can't be so easily transferred into the digital realm as well.
But do you think it's up for a renaissance with the flourishing of Insta poetry, like by Rick Koh and people like that?
Yeah, we need a resurgence. Yeah.
That's right. But what about yourself? Have you ever explored Insta poetry?
I have. Well, I have shared some of my haiga on Instagram and other platforms, but not in a big way. It's something I maybe should try a bit more.
And we have some practitioners of Insta poetry in the audience. I suppose even the students do that. And so, Rick, you've been in this field for very long. And how has the reception of art and poetry changed over the past few years?
It's great to see that certainly there's more content, more activity for sure. When I was in my 20s, I was involved with Professor Tambu and other writers in putting together multilingual anthologies and organizing readings and events. And the scale of the Poetry Festival Singapore today is much larger than what we were able to put together in those days. So in terms of scale, it's great to see that it's certainly growing.
Okay, and so these days, what do you think are the roles that poetry plays in society, especially in Singapore?
I think poetry has the ability, sometimes even almost a duty, at least it's felt that way by the poet, to highlight something important in society that not everybody seems to be able to see. And maybe this is a good time to look at the third poem, which is that I wanted to share, which is this poem. The poem is inspired by this painting, titled "Workers in a Canteen" by the realist artist Chua Mia Tee. It was painted in 1974 when he visited Jurong Shipyard. I believe at that time it was called Far East Livingston Shipyard. And what he wanted to do was to put the spotlight on the shipyard workers and the contributions that they were making to Singapore's growing economy. At that time, the Singapore's industrial estate was still very young, and this inspired me to update that message and take it from 1974 to 2022. And it struck me that what Chua Mia Tee is trying to convey about the shipyard workers remains totally relevant. I'll read the poem and then say a bit more. Before I read the poem, let me just explain that the first throughout the poem, there are some jargon terms which are taken from my time when I was working at the Economic Development Board. Terms that we use almost on a daily basis to do with economic development. And there's also this reference to Goh's folly, which is a reference to Dr. Goh Keng Swee, the former finance minister, whose idea it was to develop Jurong into an industrial estate for Singapore's very young economy at that time. The poem is titled Industry, and there's more than one meaning to it. And it is dedicated to Chua Mia Tee and his daughter Chua Yang. Industry 2.0, we dared to dream, to do. Every day at the EDB, our helicopter visioned PowerPoints animating value propositions, presenting lists of unique selling points, incentives to create the future, never with much land, but always a magnet for capital. Investing in upskilling manpower, better, faster, ever confident in your industry. Jurong, mocked as Goh's folly, vindicated later by workers like you, reassembling injured ships, sometimes risking breaking your own limbs, so that the backbone of our dear Lion City's tiger economy could be manufactured on your backs. To relaunch the old maritime Silk Road's cargo from spices to semiconductors. But now, with supply chains so backed up, amidst as much infectious zeal for growth, this canteen's still your go-to daily joy. So again, it's left to poetry and art, life's non-essentials, to inject the essential booster anew, even if it won't go viral. Of saluting you, our unsung heroes, unheralded frontliners of an earlier age.
Thank you. You surely wrote that last year, during the height of the pandemic.
So during the last 3 years, we thanked the many frontliners, healthcare workers, even food delivery riders. But aside from the port authorities, I don't think anyone paid very much attention to shipyard workers, the same group of people that Chua Mia Tee was trying to draw society's attention to back in 1974.
And, okay, Rick, I'm also curious, just who have been the greatest influences on your poetry? And, right, so this poem talks about nation building, right? And is it a particularly Singaporean thing to do, to write about that particular period in the Republic's history? What makes this a Singaporean poem? That's it. Those are two questions.
Well, your first question,
Influences.
my influences. Well, what I have, well, some of them are are dead Western writers. Some are very much alive. Professor Edwin Tambu. I think those of you who know Edwin Tambu's poetry will recognize the form of this poem, the phrasing, the length of the lines, the use of rhyme, occasional. Although I think I use it a bit more than Professor Tambu. But I think the form, I think some of you would recognize it. And that's certainly a very Singaporean influence. And your second question was about the
What makes it a Singaporean poem?
Well, I would think there's no question that this is a Singaporean poem, right? It's references to EDB and Goh Keng Swee and even this survey, this unfortunate survey. Probably for poets, a very Singaporean data point that we took.
And is that one of your attempts to reconfigure poetry by using like jargon from EDB and to transform that into a work of art?
Well, partly it's because I spent so long with this jargon. I'm glad that I'm still able to make some good use of it. And one of my other motivations was also to draw in new audiences. I hope to interest some of my former EDB colleagues to take up reading poetry.
Right. Yeah. So I suppose you're inviting them to your book launch. Rick is going to launch his volume of poems inspired by the artworks in the National Gallery very soon, right?
Later this year. Yes, it's a good idea. I will invite them. Let's see how many show up. Yes.
Right. And I'm sure the young members in our audience would like to know, what is your approach to writing? Like, do you have any tips for them, since they are working on their own writing portfolios? Any tips on writing for them?
I think that there are too many to enumerate. We need several workshops. Maybe I'll just highlight a couple of points which may have emerged from our conversation, which are maybe out of the norm. I think one is this close relationship with the visual arts, which is something which I've had the a privileged opportunity to do for quite a long period of my writing life. I've had the chance to work with artists like the watercolorist Ong Kim Seng, the modern artist Thomas Yeo, a little bit with Iskandar Jalil, and so on. So it's something that I find very fascinating. This possible synergy between the two art forms, and it's possible to find those synergies with many other endeavors. Like, for example, earlier when we looked at that art installation, Fragment of a Shoreline, it involved some carpentry, lighting design, and lots of other elements. And if you go to the companion website of that artwork, there are many other elements as well: music, video. So there's plenty of opportunity there to find synergies with other art forms. Yeah.
Wonderful. Right. Perhaps you could take some questions from the audience. You've got poets and poetry enthusiasts here. Is there any response to Rick's work? Or if you have any questions for him? Okay. Yeah, you can use this microphone.
You don't have to come. Thanks. Hi. Buck Song, thank you so much for sharing. Like, really enjoyed the poems you shared and all the creative process that you've undertaken. Just wondering, what are some of your favorite works at the National Gallery, since you've spent some time there? And are they the same works as these, or yeah, could you share what was it like experiencing some of these works and before translating them into art? Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Waikit, for your question. Well, yes, certainly these three artworks that I've highlighted are among the favorites, as are the other 31 that. No, is it no? The other 30 that are in the book and which will be published later this year. I say 30 instead of 32 because one of the poems, one of the artworks is a haiga dedicated to the gallery itself. So the gallery itself is the inspiration. And the 32nd work was actually inspired by the experience of watching sunrise from the Padang deck, especially arranged for that. And it's something that usually at that hour, only security and maintenance personnel have access to that space. I actually wanted to, it wasn't the most spectacular sunrise. I actually thought of going again to get a better pictures and better experience. But the gallery went to so much trouble and mobilized all the security personnel for this early morning foray that I only went once. Yeah. So the other works are in the book, and they include. It's not just painting. It includes pottery, sculpture, light installations, and during this period, the National Gallery actually had this initiative called the People's Gallery, through which they brought the artworks, mostly paintings, to almost 30 void decks across the island, and people could visit these void decks and use their phones to call up the augmented reality images and enjoy artworks. And the day that I visited, I had a absolutely amazing experience. I actually made a video about it. It was really quite serendipitous because the artworks are on a rotating basis, and when on a subsequent visit, they were far less. The artworks that I saw that day were far less engaging. On the first visit, almost all the artworks resonated with important milestones in my own life, and I did a video highlighting all those resonances. You can find the video if you go to my YouTube channel.
Any other question for Rick? Well, while they're formulating their questions, I could ask you another one, which was asked in the previous panel that you were part of. Is there still room for social realist art and documentary poetry right now?
Yes, of course. Chua Miati is my as I said at that event at the National Gallery. Chua Miati is my kind of artist, the kind of artist who's trying to say something. He's not just trying to capture a beautiful memory. He's actually trying to tell people something. It's like he notices something important in society, and he wants to highlight it to the rest of his fellow countrymen or anyone else around the world who might be the least bit interested. And I think that's always been the impulse of poets. That's what drives us, and we see something and we want to say something, and we hope that others would come to see it too.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Okay. From NUS High School.
Hello, thank you for your sharing just now. Dr. Valles asked you the questions about like tips, right? And you mentioned how you link it to visual arts. I was just wondering if like the musical arts have also influenced any of your works, and if you ever delved into combining both of these rather than just visual arts.
Not music specifically. No.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah. I'm not I don't think I have any musical talent. I come from a very humble family background and never had piano lessons or anything like that. So I have this handicap, I guess. And as Eric says, maybe in the future. Yeah.
I wonder if you are aspiring to like to have some musical qualities in your own verse. Is that a conscious effort, like, or you don't think of it at all?
I'm very fond of rhyme, and I use it whenever possible. So I guess to some ears that is a kind of music.
So to have rhythm in
Yeah.
your work.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your sharing. Of all your poems, which of them seem the most memorable to you? Like like maybe which works are you the proudest of?
I think this is a question that probably very few writers would have an immediate answer to, because it's not something that we do, and I fundamentally not a fan of rankings. But I would say that the three poems that I've shared this evening are among my current favorites. And if you force me to pick one, it would have to be Shoreline, Singapore. Because of its subject matter, it is, of the three, has the longest timeline. It goes back to 1843. It has the largest scope because it's about the essence and the future of Singapore. And it also gets to the heart of the way we are as a people and a country.
So for the members of the audience, do watch for Rick Koh's upcoming book on the collection of poems inspired by artworks in the National Gallery, right? And it's coming out before the end of the year.
Hopefully.
Okay, right. Any other question before we end?
Hi, is this on? Okay, hi. Thank you for sharing your poems tonight. I'm interested to find out more about your thoughts between the relationship between the image and the text. So far, what you've shared seemed to draw inspiration from the image, but you made mention during the talk about the haiga tradition. I was wondering, you can talk a bit more about your thoughts on the relationship between the image and text occupying the same space itself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I apologize that I haven't shown any haiga artworks. It's partly to keep them under wraps until the book is out.
But there must be some of them on Google, right?
Yes. If you want to see some of my previous works, there is a video on my YouTube channel, which is a video run-through of an exhibition of haiga, which is currently on. It's at this place called the Grits Coffee Bar. It's a coffee bar and event space on South Bridge Road, number 200 South Bridge Road in Chinatown. And you can either visit it and see it in real life or watch the video. And there are other haiga artworks that are on my social media. Your question was also about the relationship, right, between the visual element and the words. And it's something that I'm still working on. I'm trying to improve the relationship between the two. I think in my earlier works, they were, I guess to use an analogy from the visual arts, representational. For example, one of my earliest haigas was about made reference to Mount Fuji, and of course there's a picture of Mount Fuji, but it's just a picture of Mount Fuji with some clouds, which I hope is done in a aesthetically pleasing way. But I've been trying to improve that by moving towards the abstract, meaning instead of drawing the whole, representing the whole summit of Mount Fuji, perhaps zooming in on some detail, maybe some rocks halfway up, or you know, some not the entire image, but just part of it. And in the haiga artworks in the book that's being published by the National Gallery, I've also experimented with watercolor, but in a way that is not to add color to every part of the picture, but only certain parts of it to highlight some key aspects of it. So that's the direction that I'm moving in to improve the relationship between the image and the words. Yeah.
And Rick is a polymath, and he's into a lot of areas as well. And these areas go beyond poetry and the arts. Could you tell us some of the projects that you're involved in right now?
Right now, helping to promote the Poetry Festival Singapore.
Yeah, thank you very much for that.
I actually, well, there's a book that I might be beginning to start work on, but it's not confirmed yet, so I can't talk about it. I actually don't have many other projects on currently. It's kind of I'm still in this lull period after the residency, and there have been a couple of things that have happened in the wake of that. And in fact, just about a week ago, I was asked to write a poem for an event to thank to show appreciation to the donors of the National Gallery. So I wrote a poem. It's titled "Gifts of Art," and it's about the gifts that come from artists. And I use an audiences and donors. And the gifts from artists, I use this metaphor to sum it up. So the three lines capture what is it that art yearns to offer to the world, and they are the ingredients of soul, like pollen, oft on slight breeze, germinating only where they're welcome to have fallen.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rick. And so for the past hour, thanks for sharing with us your poetry, your art, and your joy, the joy of writing about things that matter and that mean something to society and to yourself. And thanks for sharing Singapore with your verses. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the Poetry Festival continues. There is a panel discussion that will be broadcast soon online. You may want to watch that. There will be several festival directors talking about the work of organizing literary and other festivals. And then tomorrow we'll have plenty of readings. And we'll have the award ceremony for the National Poetry Competition. And the top winners are the awardees for the Ing Peng An Award, right? And so that's it. So please attend the sessions, either live here or online. Also at the Arts House, there will be a poetry competition and art exhibit. So thank you very much, Rick, and members of the audience. Thank you. And if you have any more questions or comments for Rick, you may stay behind and chat with him.
Thank you very much. A real privilege. Thanks for having me.